Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, which connects you with the world's top independent management consultants. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm so excited to be here today with Sarah Preisser, who runs the firm Mindset Talent. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will.
So, Sarah, I know that you focus on workforce and talent management. I'm hoping that you're going to teach me about that field of consulting today. Just why don't you start with this definition? What is workforce and talent management all about?
So, if you think about organizations that have, a business strategy and they've got a lot of people that are working to achieve that business strategy, often there are things that get in the way of achieving the business strategy that relate to the people. And workforce strategy and talent strategy is really about thinking holistically about having the right people as part of your organization, getting them aligned, giving them the right motivations, the right roles and responsibilities, the right skills, the right support, ultimately, so they can be successful.
Okay. So, I imagine, so give me some examples of types of projects that you would do within that overarching umbrella.
For sure. So I'll share a little bit about my background. Before I created Mindset Talent, I worked for Accenture for 21 years. I worked the first 10 in client-facing roles, and then I spent the last 11 working internally as a talent strategist. And the role of the talent strategist would partner with the business leads across each of Accenture's businesses to really understand based on the business strategy and where we were trying to go, what was going to be required to get there. In terms of the types of things that would come up in those conversations, we would obviously explore, like, how many people will we need to do that? And what do they need to look like in terms of skill set, in terms of seniority? Where do they need to be located? And then we would put together a plan to support achieving that. In some cases, it would be maybe a focused campaign to attract talent to join us in a specific metro location. In other scenarios, it might be reskilling people. So if we had a group of people that were working in an area that was dying out in terms of demand, but was a close leap to get to another skill that we were really in dire need of, we could give training and development and support to those people to help them transition to having the skill set that we needed in the future. Kind of a third flavor of work that would often emerge in that space is leadership development. So working with our leaders to understand the skills that they had and the skills that they would need to be more effective with their clients, and then putting together a plan, whether it be one-on-one coaching or support and development for them to join various organizations outside of Accenture that would help them build the business acumen, build the presence, build the content knowledge that they needed to be more effective as leaders. So it's a very broad area. I sometimes talk about it being as you're kind of an interventionist as a talent strategist, because you're having to do the deep work to understand, how are the systems impacting the people, and where are the gaps or the deficiencies in terms of what we're going to need to get to the business outcome, and then putting together kind of a suite of interventions that will help support the change and take the organization where it needs to go.
Yeah, that's a helpful background. So I imagine that your clients now don't come to you and just say, "Hey, I need help, like I need a new talent strategy," just in general. They probably come for, something maybe, more specific, some kind of thing like we're closing down a plant or we're opening a new business unit or
Definitely.
so give us some examples of, sanitized examples of specific projects that you'd work on.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of work this year, specifically around the employee experience. So often in a work environment, um, people have an experience, whether you've intentionally created that experience to be a certain way or not. And understanding that experience can actually help you uncover things that are potentially holding your organization back, or things that are huge opportunities that are kind of left untapped. And so the employee experience work is really about talking to employees and gathering, tons and tons of data, their words, their insights. And I do this via focus groups. I do this through some design thinking methods and sessions that I've run in person, but now I'm running online to really get at the root of, like, what is it like to work in this place? What are the good things about working here? What are the not good things, right? Like, what are the thorny things about working here, and what opportunities do you see? And it's super interesting when you can ask 150 people just those three simple questions, and give them the opportunity to tell you. Because when you take that data and put it together on a page, really quickly you can learn a ton about the organization. Like, themes emerge where you can see that potentially you've got like diversity and inclusion issues, that maybe you didn't expect. You've got challenges in terms of some of the cultural dynamics, or workplace practices that people are unhappy about. You can sometimes see, people aren't happy about how they get paid, but the problems that I've focused on with my clients in the past couple of years have been far more narrow, and also they start off often not being sure what the problem is. They come to me and kind of say, hey, we feel like we need to do something in this space, but we're not quite sure what it is. And so we map out a plan to get clear definition of what needs to happen. And then from there, you can actually say, okay, well, let's run a program that's going to be focused on um, understanding the workload of this group at this specific point in time, and how might we improve either their ability to handle the amount of work that has popped up in this life cycle, or how can we reallocate some of that work? Because in some cases, in one case with a particular client I was working with, they had a team that um, routinely became the bottleneck, and we needed to look for ways that we could offload some of the work from that team, so that the floodgates would kind of open, and things would flow naturally in terms of their processes that they were using to support some of their people.
I'm interested in the type of work that you've done that would be about figuring out what skills is this either company overall or this business unit going to need in the future, and trying to do an assessment of what skills do they have now. Is there some kind of ontology of skills or Dewey Decimal System of skills that
Yeah,
you would use for that? Like, how would you? I'm curious to hear about both. Like, one is, even how do you even assess current state skills of everybody? That sounds like a massive problem. And
it is.
and then how do you figure out, for a business that it's not even created yet or looking into the future, what skills are we going to need like 2 years from now? Talk to me about both aspects.
Okay. So at a more established organization, typically they do have a Dewey Decimal System for their skills. They'll talk about it as a competency model or a skills framework. And typically those are things that they've built over time. And often organizations will do assessments ongoing of their current, their people's current skills against that Dewey Decimal System, in a way that they have at least a sense of where their strengths lie.
And is that usually like homemade, or is there some sort of industry standard skill, classification
So
system?
there is not a skill classification system per se in terms of the content, but a lot of the software that is used to manage people. So, like, if you think about success factors, or you think about Workday, they have functionality that actually supports you to create a skills framework. Now, the content of that skills framework is up to you. because obviously you can have varying degree of specificity. You can also have fairly rapid changing. The nature of the skills changes quickly, and so clients, if they have a standard, if they have a standard human capital management system that includes something that supports your skills framework, will typically have a team of people that are constantly working to understand what are the skills of our organization, and ensuring that they've got people mapped to those skills. It's a lot of work. For smaller organizations where it's not as industrialized, it's not probably they aren't as they don't have as much detail in terms of the skills that their people have. They are very likely in a situation where they've got a sense of, well, we've got, sales folks, we've got builders, we've got manufacturers, we've got people working on the line. And so they've got job classifications, and a lot of the skills that are required are probably living more so in their job descriptions, as opposed to in some massive skills inventory. The the way that, at an industrialized level you are working in skills, you're kind of doing like an annual maintenance of, understanding what are the skills we have, what are the skills we need, and you can run surveys and you can assess skills. Some organizations are shifting more towards real time updates to their skills. Obviously, LinkedIn has kind of taken over, as being the home for people's experiences. And so some some of the conversation about skills is actually now, less inside the organization and more outside, because people are more likely to keep their LinkedIn up to date than they are their internal resume or their internal skills.
That
Um,
that seems like such a It seems so interesting to me that there's not like a good industry standard. You'd think that there's, probably different categories of types of skills, and, there's probably like more analytical skills that you could clearly define,
mhm.
knowing how to use particular software programs. Like, okay, this person can use Excel at the ninja level. This person can program Python. This person knows how to use, Adobe Photoshop or something. And then there might be skills that are more communications or human interrelationship type skills, like listening skills or speaking skills. And you'd think that they're, you know, if someone can write, or creating a good, PowerPoint presentation would be like a skill, right? You'd think that that would be sort of, it's not that different between Accenture and McKinsey. And if you work at IBM or Google, like if you can create a good, clear flow for a PowerPoint presentation, that should be like a skill. It's interesting to me that, there hasn't emerged a standardized classification scheme that is an open
I
source kind
know.
of thing.
Yeah, I know. If there has, in the past couple of years, I haven't seen it.
Huh.
I mean, the closest, and it's a little bit of a jump, but the closest thing that is more standardized, um, is in the compensation and benefits space. There are a number of, large organizations that supply job benchmarking data. Um, so there are standard jobs that our organizations are using to kind of match the internal jobs to, in order to evaluate, are we in the 80th percentile? Are we at the 90th percentile in terms of relative pay for that job as compared with organizations of our peers? And those jobs obviously are bundled, to a certain degree, are bundled assumptions about skills, but the skills level, is not something that I've ever seen to exist. And in my experience, people have strong opinions about, how much detail they want. The business leaders, are often involved in helping to define what the skills look like. And I think some standardization along the lines of what you suggest would actually save a significant amount of debate and time. But it would be a lot of work to do. I mean, it's the tech skills especially are changing so quickly. It used to be that a skill, a standalone skill, had a lifetime of 5 years. And now I would say there are things that emerge as critical and hot, and they're critical and hot for, a year, 2 years. And the skills that actually matter the most, if you think about next generation skills, and for companies that don't know, what they need or what they will need in the future. And I often go to critical thinking, problem solving, learning agility, because we are now in this mode where we can't just have gathered the skills up and then rest on those skills for the rest of our lives. Change is a reality. And so if you don't have learning agility and you don't have the mindset that you're having to constantly learn and evolve and shift and change in relation to what's happening, um, you are likely going to be left behind in, individually as well as an organization.
Are there some common, or maybe it's within companies that are doing these homemade classification systems, but are there kind of some groupings that you've seen, like here's sort of specific software skills that people have that might be a category,
Yeah.
or data science skills, or communication skills, or leadership skills? Like how do they normally get bucketed?
Yeah, I mean, the most basic buckets are kind of, you've got technical skills, you've got industry skills, and then you've got like business acumen or business skills, right? And the combination of those three things can actually tell you your business acumen is probably professional skills, can give you natural groupings of the dimensions that you would want to have in place. I'm working with a client right now actually on a development program for their management team, and the the components of that model is balancing technical skills with professional skills with customer service, and then there's a personal effectiveness component. I think as we continue to think about ways that COVID and working from home impacts us, having some focus on the personal effectiveness stuff really matters in a
Mm.
way that it didn't used to, right? Like, do I sit down at my desk every day and make a list of what I'm going to achieve? Can I avoid the distractions that come up? Um, and so in working with this management team, they don't have a skills inventory or even a vernacular. I'm kind of creating the vernacular with them as they'll start to think about it. And we'll build out a curriculum to support them in growing themselves in these four dimensions.
How do you go about that second part about if a client comes to you and says, okay, we've done our skills assessment of the current state, but we're something new is happening. Either it's a new business unit, a new product, a new geography, a new, or a new partnership or new channel approach. Help us figure out what skills we need in the future state. How do you go about an exercise like that?
Yeah. So typically we have a series of conversations about where they are today versus where they want to be, and what is the delta, or how will we get there in incremental steps. The hardest part is typically helping them or pulling out of them the vision on where they really want to go, because sometimes they're not sure, right? Like they think, well, I have a sense that this is sort of where we're headed, and I think the skills that we would need in the future are X, Y, and Z, and getting that down on paper and really being able to do a comparison to their current, because a lot of times that includes growth. I didn't say that. So if you think about that often they want to grow by 2x, and right now they've got 100 people working in that space. So to grow by 2x, do they need 200 people? Are there other opportunities to potentially not grow the headcount as fast as the business is growing? And what are those opportunities? But then, imagining together what does the ideal team look like in the future to support that? What are the skills they have? How many of them are customer facing? How where are they located? How much seniority do they actually need to have when they come into the organization? and where do we think we might be able to find these folks? Um, it's you start to build a picture of what the future looks like with them, and then individually I put down on paper the implications of that, right? Like what are the different paths we can take to get to that vision? Because sometimes it's hiring, sometimes it's training, sometimes it's an acquisition, and the conditions around them, as well as their appetite for some of those things, and the current culture of the organization, all have an impact on which choice is best. If you think about companies that are smaller and really tight knit, and an acquisition, it's hard to integrate individual experience hires into a tight knit organization. An acquisition is actually sometimes a little bit easier because in that case you've got kind of two big cohorts then of people that are used to working together effectively. um, but it varies a lot based on the conditions of the organization, and the pace with which they want to change, and then the reality about how quickly they probably can change. um, and that's all discussion that we have together and kind of anchor down on the things that are fixed and we know for sure, and then further explore the things that are still open, and we go from there. But you get to a place where you've got a pretty clear plan on paper in terms of, we're going to be an organization of 200 people, we need 100 more people, these are the locations where we imagine these people will sit, if in fact it's an organization that isn't all remote. um, and these are the levels. This is kind of what we think it will cost for us to acquire or grow this talent, and and it gets them to a place where they then can build an actionable plan, bringing in their recruiting team, or bringing in their learning and talent development team to to hammer out the program and the details to support the plan.
Okay.
And sometimes I end up working with those people through the transitions just as an anchor point to help them stay on stay with the plot, right? Like, this is where we're trying to go, this is why we're trying to go there, this is what we need to get there. um, because I think sometimes things get, if they get too far from the central storyline or the central business and talent strategy, sometimes things start to get derailed, and maintaining myself as kind of a thread in those conversations, not in all the weeds, but actually like just in this is where we are and this is where we're going on a fairly frequent basis, helps them get there more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Tyler Cowen has a point of view that very few professionals treat their own skill development the way that professional athletes do. Where, any professional athlete is going to have a coach, they're going to have like a diet plan, they're going to have a workout plan, they're going to have measured their skills, they're going to have specific targets around their skills. And it seems rare for kind of white collar professionals to treat their own development the same way. Yeah, you get on the job training and you get some new role and you kind of learn some stuff, but it seems like very few professionals are like very self-disciplined about doing a self-assessment and then figuring out what skills they want to develop, and then going and taking some action outside of normal day-to-day to develop those, like practicing. Like, oh, I want to get better at creating documents. So like actually off work, practice creating documents or learn data science. Would you agree with that? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, unfortunately. I mean, I think the reality that we often live in, especially at some of the organizations that are super fast paced, is that we don't we don't take the time, and we don't prioritize self development. And there's probably a myriad of reasons. One is time, and at probably 10, 12 years ago, I was part of a leadership development program, and we agreed as a cohort that we were going to block off an hour for every Friday morning to actually spend reading and or doing some type of self-learning. And it was self-guided, but it became a practice. And it's a practice that I still continue to do today because someone gave me the permission to take that time. I think the other thing that's potentially at play is, in terms of athlete development and muscles, like we have all seen out in the world that if I lift weights, I can get stronger. And we haven't embraced the concept of growth mindset universally yet. I think our generation, probably younger, is benefiting from the fact that we've learned so much in the past 15 years about growth mindset and how while we grew up hearing, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Like that's not actually true. Um, and so a lot of our more senior leaders grew up in a time where you basically developed your skills, you proved your worth, you moved into the job, and now you supervise, and you don't have to continue to grow anymore. Um, and so I think it's put us in an interesting spot in terms of some of our more senior leaders being often stuck in the old and really needing to be encouraged and supported that you can still learn. You're not necessarily an old dog. You can't learn a new trick. I think more organizations need to focus on empowering their people to take the time to learn. I mean, you've heard, obviously, like Google has something where they let employees do a self-guided project on a fairly frequent basis on Fridays. And there are a number of other organizations, more places where they're focused on creativity and innovation, and they see the value of those things, who are prioritizing the, the time and giving people permission that that's actually part of their job. But there are tons of organizations who are like, that sounds great and all, but we don't have time for it. You can go to the once a year ethics training or the once a year professional development, but they don't necessarily see that as an investment. More so, they feel like they're potentially doing it just to jump through some hoops. So to get people to prioritize their own learning and to actually put a block of time on their calendar where they're going to do it and make it a habit, has a lasting impact. And it's something that I saw work pretty effectively when I was at Accenture, and something that as I'm working with my clients, when I hear them say, well, I don't know how to do this, I'm like, so you need to set aside time to learn that. Let's look at your schedule. Where can you actually fit it in that it won't necessarily be overrun by something else? And then, no one can help you learn that but you. You have to make a choice. Um, so yeah, I haven't read anything by
Yeah, Tyler Cowen. Yeah.
Tyler, but I would love to check it out. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about who in organizations is typically the client that you're serving. Who is the person who's responsible for this talent piece? Is there someone typically in an HR organization? Is it the CHRO, or is there typically a VP of talent management? How do companies structure responsibility for this?
Yeah, so it sort of depends. I'm working with a client right now where they don't have a CHRO. They've got a COO who's got responsibility for the people function too. But in larger organizations, often it's your CHRO or your chief people officer who is responsible for thinking about the growth and development of your talent. And for professional services firms, I think um, it's grown pretty rapidly. Like, you've got a ton of focus on learning because where our people is our product, right? In terms of professional development and professional services firms. So, so you'll see it more there in organizations where their focus isn't on consulting or providing professional services, but maybe manufacturing or other healthcare, for example. it does fall predominantly into the space of the chief HR officer to be thinking about what type of learning and development do those folks need. And depending on how close that individual is with the business leadership team has a huge impact on how closely the training and development aligns with some of the business acumen and professional skills they might need, as opposed to some of the things that are probably more likely compliance. Um, so I've seen it work really well where you've got a hybrid of things that people are focused on learning, and the chief HR officer really understands the business strategy, understands the skills that people are going to need as their jobs evolve and change, and can design something that's impactful. If your chief HR officer is far removed from the business, that's a lot harder to do. And that's probably where you see organizations that end up with kind of the compliance based training that is less effective. People are checking the box in terms of gap compliance or other things that we need to make sure to do, but not necessarily truly developing the person in terms of their technical skills or their customer facing skills.
Something that I have seen zero companies do in my 20 years of consulting, which surprises me, is what the Navy does, which seems to me to be absolutely best practice. So I was a submarine officer for 5 years. You get to a submarine, and your first day they say, hey, welcome on board. You're a DINK, which means you're delinquent in qualifications. You're unqualified. You're useless. Mm-hmm. Basically, you're not qualified to do anything on board. But they give you qualification cards, right? So you want to stand engineering officer of the watch. They give you a qualification card. It's like 50 pages, 60 pages. Each page will have 6 or 7 signatures you need to get. And it might be either you need to explain this, so you need to discuss, you might need to observe some evolutions, or you need to perform. So it's usually discuss, observe, or perform. And the perform would be under instruction. So first you typically observe something like start up the reactor, or clean and inspect this lube oil filter. You'd observe it once, and then you would perform it under instruction, right? Mm-hmm. And it's such a good system because it tells new people, here is exactly what we expect you to learn. And I can't understand why corporations don't do the same thing of saying, okay, you're a new data analyst, or you're a new assistant marketing manager, or you're new accounts receivable clerk. Here's your qualification card. Do all these things, get all this knowledge, and then you'll be qualified to do the role. What's your thought about that? Have some companies done that successfully?
Yeah, so I think that some companies have done that successfully, and it's funny, it's an old practice for the Navy, but it's something that is just being kind of acknowledged in terms of the way people learn, as it's more effective when you show them and then you have them practice and then you have them reflect on that practice. And that's like an iterative loop, right? Like observe, perform, discuss. So the training that we typically in corporate America have done is like, I'm going to give you a 6-week onboarding program, and we're going to give you all the information you need, and then you're going to go out to a client site and do it.
Right.
And what we've learned and what we're changing towards is actually saying, you know what? I'm not going to give you a bunch of junk knowledge that you might not need. What I'm going to do is give you the basics that you must understand before you set foot in a client site. And then I'm going to put a support model in where I'm going to have you show up every Friday for the next 6 weeks and do this training, which is directly relevant to your job. Because I want you to do the training on Friday, and then I want you to have a chance to practice it on Monday. Because the learning will stick then. Mm-hmm. If we do this like big 6-week dump and then send people off into the world, they've probably built some cohesion with their peers, and that's valuable, right? But they may or may not use that information when they go out into the world. And if they get an opportunity to use it in 2 years, they don't remember what you taught them at the very beginning. The work that I've been doing to kind of design, like, okay, we need to have this be like learn, practice, learn, practice iteratively in order to help people actually retain and use what they're getting.
Yeah. And the qualification card idea, it
Yeah,
empowers the employee because it says, this is what
it does.
you are supposed to know, right? And it also makes you more alert. So if something is happening that doesn't happen all the often, maybe marketing, okay, set up and take down a display at a conference or something like that. You'd like volunteer, like, oh, I want to get involved in that because it's on my qual card. So it makes you more proactive. So, hey, listeners, if you know of any company that like does that effectively, send me a note. I'd love to hear about that example. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. Sarah, this has been fantastic. How can people find out more about your firm and reach out and connect with you if they want to hear more about your firm and your practice?
So people can visit my website. It's www.mindsettalent.com. And there's obviously two T's in the middle of that, which sometimes trips people up. I'd also be happy if people want to reach out via email. Um, my email address is Sarah, SARAH dot Preisser, PREISSER at mindsettalent.com.
Fantastic. Well, Sarah, this has been a great introduction for me, and thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks so much for the time, Will.